comparing her unfavorably to Kunai, less graceful, less talented. Satisfied that she was finally ready to be devoured, Doma asked if she had any final words, to which Shinobu, without hesitation, told him to go to hell. Moments later, Kanao arrived, breathless and alarmed, having sensed something terribly wrong. As she opened the door, her eyes lifted to the ceiling, and there she saw it. Doma, nestled in the roof, held Shinobu in his arms. Before she could react, he snapped her body like a twig, killing her instantly. Shinobu's blade slipped from her lifeless hand and fell to the floor with a sharp clang. Horrified, Kanao sprang upward, drawing her blade and striking out with flower breathing, but Doma effortlessly evaded the attack, descending lightly to the floor beneath her. With a smug grin, he casually warned her against interrupting someone in the middle of a meal. Kanao's blood boiled as Doma licked Shinobu's hairpin fondly, remarking with perverse delight what a fine evening it had been, with feasts arriving one after another. At the same time, elsewhere in the Infinity Castle, Zenitsu approached a room and called out to whoever was inside. A familiar voice answered sharply, chastising Zenitsu for the improper address to his senior. From the shadows emerged Kaigaku, his expression taunting, as he scoffed at Zenitsu for being as dainty and pathetic as ever. Zenitsu calmly replied that Kaigaku was no longer his senior. He had forfeited that title the moment he became a demon. Meanwhile, news of Shinobu's death reached Tanjiro and Giyu as they dashed through the endless halls in search of Muzan. The moment hit Tanjiro like a crushing blow, and tears welled in his eyes at the thought of the insect Hashira, the kind guardian of the butterfly mansion, now gone. Giyu, however, caught sight of a peculiar slip of paper fastened to the crow's neck, noting, with quiet suspicion, how unusually fast the messages were being sent. Behind the rapid communication stood Kiriya Ubuyashiki, using Yushiro's blood demon art to transmit signals across the battlefield. As the eldest son of the Ubuyashiki family, Kiriya had assumed the role of the clan's leader. Alongside his younger sisters, Kuina and Kanada, he chose duty over grief, refusing to mourn and instead focusing on their mission. Understanding the situation was becoming increasingly dire, Kiriya ordered the widespread deployment of talismans through messenger crows to track every movement in real time. He instructed Kuina to inform all Hashira to head north, toward Muzan. Kuina acknowledged, adding that currently, 2 demon slayers were locked in battle with upper-rank demons, Kanao and Zenitsu, who was facing upper-rank 6. Back in the room, Kaigaku and Zenitsu stood eye to eye. Kaigaku mocked him again, calling him a weakling who could only use the first form of thunder breathing. Zenitsu replied calmly, then jabbed back, saying Kaigaku had only managed to fill a vacant slot among the upper ranks, and that too at the bottom. His words cut deeper than expected. Zenitsu pushed further, demanding how Kaigaku could become a demon when their master, Jigoro Kuwajima, had committed seppuku in agony, shouldering the shame that a thunder-breathing user had turned into a demon. Kaigaku, far from remorseful, scoffed at the mention of their master. He claimed Jigoro had never valued him, and he only served those who did. He explained bitterly that despite giving everything in training, Jigoro had dared to name both him and Zenitsu as co-successors, a decision he saw as a betrayal. Zenitsu's anger flared. He shot back that Jigoro wasn't senile, and if Zenitsu was a scum for knowing only one form, then Kaigaku was even worse for never mastering it at all. He pitied their master for having such ungrateful students to inherit his legacy. Enraged by Zenitsu's taunts, Kaigaku unleashed thunder-breathing fourth form, hurling lightning shockwaves toward his foe, only for Zenitsu to vanish from sight before the attack could connect. Reappearing behind Kaigaku, Zenitsu whispered that he was too slow, just as Kaigaku's eyes widened in shock, realizing his neck had already been cut. He could barely believe the speed at which Zenitsu had moved. It felt unnatural. For a brief moment, Kaigaku's mind drifted back to a grim memory, his encounter with Kokushibo, upper rank 1. He had knelt then, without shame, because overwhelming power demanded submission. Kokushibo had offered him Muzan's blood, and Kaigaku had accepted. The moment he drank it, his body burned, every cell screaming in terror as he transformed. Yet compared to that agony, facing Zenitsu now felt far less terrifying. Despite Zenitsu's growth, Kaigaku believed he remained a coward, a man who cried and lacked resolve. Enraged, he shouted that both of them deserved to die, then unleashed a relentless flurry of thunder-breathing forms. His blade slashed Zenitsu's face and tore through his body, each strike fused with his blood demon art. With a final blow, Kaigaku hurled Zenitsu down the corridor, crashing him through walls and floors. As Zenitsu free fell, Kaigaku sneered, claiming he was truly special, unlike him. The moment stirred a memory in Zenitsu of Jigoro's constant taunts, urging him to learn from his senior. But in those days, Kaigaku often clashed with the others, drawing resentment for his arrogance and failing to grasp even the most basic form of their style. Zenitsu had always known Kaigaku hated him for mastering the first form, and in truth, he had returned that resentment. But deep down, he had still respected Kaigaku's dedication. To both him and Jigoro, Kaigaku had been someone special. Yet Kaigaku had never felt content, and that emptiness had led him down this path. With his eyes closed, Zenitsu offered a silent apology to their late master for the 2 disciples who had walked such different roads. Then, mid-fall, he shifted his weight and planted his feet against the wall, stopping his descent. Kaigaku stared in disbelief, questioning whether Zenitsu still had any strength left in him. In the next instant, Zenitsu blurred past him in a flash of light, unleashing thunder-breathing 7th form, flaming thunder god. The blade cleaved cleanly through Kaigaku's neck, As Kaigaku's head tumbled, he couldn't comprehend what had happened. The attack had come too fast, too sudden. He cursed Jigoro in his final thoughts, insisting the master had favored Zenitsu and given him an exclusive form. But Zenitsu corrected him. Jigoro had never played favorites. That new form was his own creation, a form he had crafted alone, hoping one day they would fight together side by side. With that said, Zenitsu plummeted, unconscious, and moments away from crashing to his death. But just then, out of nowhere, Yushiro appeared, leaping effortlessly across the walls of the Infinity Castle. In a flash, he caught Zenitsu's falling body, saving him from certain doom, while behind them, the remnants of the defeated upper rank began to disintegrate into ash. Lost in his unconsciousness, Zenitsu found himself in a dreamlike afterlife, standing at the edge of a quiet river. Across it stood his master. Overcome with emotion, Zenitsu broke down in uncontrollable tears as he expressed his guilt for not being able to save Kaigaku, for failing to become a Hashira before his death, and for not living up to the hopes his master had placed in him. For a long moment, Jigoro remained silent, making Zenitsu fear the worst, that his master harbored disappointment or resentment. But then, tears welled in the old man's eyes as he broke his silence, not with blame, but with pride. He declared Zenitsu to be his joy, the student who made him proud. Back in reality, Zenitsu stirred awake, slowly regaining consciousness, to find Yushiro tending to his wounds. Surrounding him were Murata and other demon slayers who stood watch over him, ensuring his safety. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the castle, the water-breathing duo advanced swiftly. Tanjiro, scanning their path, noticed that they had yet to encounter any upper ranks and began to wonder aloud where Muzan and the remaining Hashira might be. As if summoned by fate, the ground beneath them rumbled violently, and a sudden tremor shook the area. Before either could react, the ceiling above split open, and from the debris descended none other than upper rank 3, Akaza. He landed gracefully and greeted Tanjiro with a taunt, eyes burning with anticipation as the two finally crossed paths again. Wasting no time, Akaza launched a powerful punch at Tanjiro, who evaded the strike by spinning upward mid-air, performing Dance of Sun God, Fire Wheel. With a swift flip, he caught Akaza's arm mid-motion, and using all his might, sliced it clean off with his blade. Having landed a successful hit on an upper rank, Tanjiro's confidence rose, if only briefly. For as he turned, Akaza had already regenerated and retaliated with a brutal back fist. Tanjiro barely ducked under the attack, narrowly escaping, but managed to counter with a slash across Akaza's face. Akaza paused, his gaze narrowing. For the first time, he acknowledged Tanjiro's strength, recalling Rengoku's words from their last encounter, that Tanjiro was not weak. With that, the upper rank decided to take him seriously and activated his technique, revealing that he would now fight with his full might. Just then, Giyu leapt into action, launching himself toward Akaza with a water-breathing third form. Using it to dart gracefully around the flurry of blows, he closed the distance swiftly. Akaza recognized Giyu at once, and, noting that it had been 50 years since his last fight with a water Hashira, retaliated with a barrage of powerful shockwaves. But Giyu remained composed and responded with water-breathing 11th form, dead calm, dispelling the incoming shockwaves with a seamless wave of silence. Akaza's eyes lit up with intrigue, impressed by the technique, one he had never witnessed before, as the last water Hashira he had killed had not used it. Seizing the distraction, Tanjiro attempted a surprise attack aimed at Akaza's neck, but the upper rank vanished and reappeared behind him in a blur, striking out with the intent to decapitate. Tanjiro was nearly finished, but Giyu once again arrived in time, slicing through Akaza's arm and saving Tanjiro from certain death. Akaza, unfazed, regenerated his limb instantly and retaliated with a vicious kick to Giyu. Even though the water Hashira managed to block it using the hilt of his sword, the sheer force of the blow sent him crashing through several walls. As Tanjiro screamed out for Giyu, Akaza reappeared before him, having now taken full note of the Hashira's identity. Without hesitation, Tanjiro activated Dance of Sun God once more and clashed directly with the demon. However, Akaza took the blow head-on. The impact sent debris flying, but barely left a mark on him. Meanwhile, Tanjiro was flung backward, slamming into the wall. Akaza stood tall in the dust, grinning as he praised Tanjiro's growth. He recalled how, during their first encounter, Tanjiro was barely worth noticing, weak and fragile. But now, he had risen considerably. Yet even while praising him, Akaza made a cruel remark, claiming that Rengoku's death was necessary. According to him, the flame Hashira had no room for growth left and clung to the pointless ideal of remaining human. The insult made Tanjiro's blood boil. He demanded that Akaza take back his words, but the demon seemed confused, thinking he had paid them both a compliment. Tanjiro shouted back, accusing Akaza of always mocking and belittling those he fought. Akaza, however, clarified his philosophy. He stated that he only despised weakness, believing it to be disgusting, and considered it nature's law for the weak to be eliminated. But Tanjiro refuted that belief, saying that he was standing right there, despite having once been weak. He claimed that everyone starts out fragile, but it's the strength of others, their kindness, their sacrifices, that help people grow. Clutching his sword tightly, Tanjiro declared that true strength wasn't about domination, but about protecting those weaker than oneself, and that the weak too had the power to rise and stand beside the strong. He vowed that he would not let Akaza have his way any longer. Those words pierced Akaza deeply. There was something about Tanjiro's voice, his gaze, and his resolve that rattled him. It wasn't just annoyance, it was discomfort, an inexplicable agitation that made him clench his fists. Then suddenly, he felt a presence. A phantom touch on his shoulder, a whisper echoing the very words Tanjiro had spoken. The voice reminded him that even the strong once began as weak, and that true power was born of protection. Akaza instinctively swung his arm back, trying to strike the source, only to find nothing there. Tanjiro, confused, tried to make sense of Akaza's strange behavior. But before he could, the upper ranks snarled in charge, fury now fully unleashed. The sheer force of his impact shattered the floor beneath them. Tanjiro narrowly avoided the attack, stunned by the increase in Akaza's speed and intensity. Before he could respond, Akaza closed the gap again and launched a devastating uppercut, grazing Tanjiro's chin and causing him to cough up blood. The onslaught didn't stop there. Akaza followed with another blow, but Tanjiro barely ducked under it, still trying to understand how Akaza was reading his every move so precisely. Each strike was aimed exactly at his vital points, as if his fists were drawn by instinct to the most fatal spots. Desperate to comprehend it, Tanjiro cast his mind back to Akaza's fight with Rengoku, trying to glean a clue. But before he could find the answer, Akaza swung his leg toward him. Tanjiro dodged again and countered with Dance of Sun God, but Akaza caught his blade mid-swing. Trapped, Tanjiro headbutted him in desperation, but it barely fazed Akaza. Smiling viciously, the demon held his grip firm. Even a desperate kick to the chin couldn't shake him off. The blade began to creak under the pressure, seconds away from snapping. Then, out of nowhere, Akaza's hands were slashed clean off. Tanjiro staggered back and looked up. Giyu had returned, a fierce expression on his blood-streaked face and a splash-like demon slayer mark now visible on his cheek. The water Hashira had awakened his full potential and rushed at Akaza once more, unleashing water-breathing fourth form and cleaving through the demon's arm again, though not without receiving a deep gash across his head in return. From a distance, Tanjiro observed in awe and concern. Even with Giyu's newfound speed and power, Akaza was adjusting rapidly. His adaptability was terrifying. Tanjiro knew then, if this battle dragged on, they'd be in serious trouble. The chance to stop Muzan might slip away entirely. His mind raced, trying to decode Akaza's method of tracking their movements so flawlessly. He remembered something Akaza had said about battle spirit and pondered over its meaning. That's when a memory resurfaced, a conversation with Inosuke back at the Butterfly Mansion. Inosuke had once mentioned that he could feel battle spirit like a sting, an instinctual sensation of where the enemy would strike. He claimed that by suppressing one's killing intent, it was possible to approach undetected. At the time, Tanjiro dismissed the idea. After all, how could one slay a demon without intent? But now, in the thick of battle, that absurd memory sparked a thought. Maybe there was truth in Inosuke's madness. Perhaps Akaza wasn't reading their physical movements, but their intent. And if so, suppressing it might be key to disrupting his compass needle technique. While Giyu and Akaza continued to exchange fierce blows, Tanjiro snapped back into the moment. He saw an opening and lunged at Akaza's exposed neck, but the upper rank, anticipating the move, snatched his sword midair and threw a counterpunch, mocking him for making such an obvious move. Tanjiro just barely managed to avoid the worst of it, earning a deep slash across his stomach. Giyu returned instantly, re-engaging Akaza in battle as Tanjiro stumbled backward, now clutching his wound. But even through the haze of pain, a realization crystallized in his mind, something profound, a potential answer to everything. Tanjiro's mind drifted instinctively to a distant memory, one where he once asked his father how he managed to perform the Dance of Sun God. Even back then, as a child, Tanjiro had sensed how physically demanding the ritual dance was. He knew that executing all 12 forms from sunset to sunrise would place a tremendous strain on the body, and though he didn't fully understand the ritual's purpose, he had always worried for his father's health. But Tanjiro had only smiled and explained that he never found it difficult. He recounted learning it from his own father, admitting that though he had been younger and stronger in those days, it still left him completely drained. He believed it was because of unnecessary motion. True mastery, he said, lay in controlled breathing, conserving energy, and releasing it in precise, refined bursts. He told Tanjiro that as one sharpened their physical awareness, right down to the smallest blood vessels, and honed their senses through relentless training, a new realm would open to them, the transparent world. It was not a skill granted, but earned through discipline and clarity of the mind. When Tanjiro asked if he could ever reach that level, his father gently placed a hand on his head and assured him that with dedication, he could. Not long before his passing, on a snowy night, Tanjiro suddenly awoke and asked his son to follow him vanished. Before Akaza could even grasp what that meant, Tanjiro had already closed the gap and, with Dance of Sun God, setting, Sun Transformation, sliced clean through his neck. Akaza stood there, headless, stunned. He could not understand how he had been bested so easily. In all his years, he had never encountered someone who fought without fighting spirit. Even infants exuded a will to live. But Tanjiro, he had become something entirely different, an aberration, a warrior invisible to the senses his techniques depended on. More than anything, Akaza was in awe. Despite all his martial arts experience, all his power, he had been outmatched. Tanjiro had grasped a deeper truth and moved beyond him. But even then, Akaza refused to die. Clutching his severed head, he tried to reattach it, swearing he would keep fighting, keep growing stronger. Realizing what was happening, Tanjiro and Giyu acted quickly. The water Hashira threw his broken sword like a dagger, striking Akaza's head midair and knocking it away, before it could fully rejoin his body. As the head began to disintegrate to ash, Tanjiro finally allowed himself a breath of relief. Yet that breath was short-lived. Giyu's eyes widened in shock as he realized Akaza's body hadn't begun to fade. Even without a head, the upper moon's body suddenly activated Compass Needle once more. In a horrifying display of will, it assumed a battle stance and lunged directly for Tanjiro's throat. Tanjiro just barely dodged, but his body, still reeling from earlier, suffered the blow's aftermath. He was kicked violently, sent flying into the castle's broken stone walls. On the ground, dazed and gasping, he questioned how Akaza still lived. Then it hit him. The upper moon wasn't just regenerating, he was evolving, like Muzan, trying to eliminate the head as a weakness altogether. Tanjiro tried to rise, but his body failed him. He had pushed too far, and now he collapsed unconscious. Watching the events unfold and seeing Akaza move in to strike a vulnerable Tanjiro with lethal intent, Giyu sprang into action, grabbing his broken sword and shouting at the upper moon to face him first if he wanted to reach Tanjiro. At that moment, a voice stirred within Akaza's mind, a whisper about the unyielding spirit of a true warrior. But he brushed it off, stepping forward to finish what he started. Then, just as he moved, he was stopped. A vision of a young woman appeared before him. Her hands clutched his wrist, her tearful voice begging him to stop. She called him Hakuji. Akaza recoiled, confused and furious, demanding she release him and explain who she was. But the woman simply continued to plead with him, asking him to come with her, to let go of this path, and join her on the other side. He refused. He wanted to stay. He wanted to kill Giyu and Tanjiro. When asked why, he answered without hesitation. He needed to become stronger so he could bring medicine back to his father. And with that, the haze returned. Memories long buried began to surface. He remembered a time when he wasn't Akaza, but a desperate 11-year-old named Hakuji, a boy who stole to survive, not for himself, but to keep his sick father alive. One day, he had been caught, beaten by those who despised him, and dragged before a magistrate. As punishment for his repeated crimes, he had been tattooed as a criminal, warned that the next time, he would lose a hand. Tied up and bloodied from his lashings, Hakuji only laughed and shrugged off the magistrate's threat. The magistrate, frustrated by the repeated crimes committed by a boy so young, couldn't believe the punishment wasn't enough to break him. He muttered that Hakuji must be a demon child to endure beatings that would make grown men faint. Hakuji left the office, unbothered by the insult. If anything, it amused him. After all, he was born with fang-like teeth. But when he reached his home, a man met him at the door and delivered a crushing truth. His father had taken his own life. Ashamed upon hearing that his son had been caught stealing again, he had hanged himself. The next morning, Hakuji stood before his father's grave. Hakuji turned 18. Kuyuki, now 16, had recovered. She could walk, laugh, and live like any other girl. Her days were bright again. One day, while sweeping the dojo, Keizo called him into the main hall. Sitting across from one another, Keizo asked if Hakuji would become his successor and marry his daughter. The proposal left him speechless. He had been branded a criminal, a thug. He had never imagined a future, let alone one where someone loved him. But now that future was within reach, a righteous life, just like his father had wished. Bowing his head in gratitude, Hakuji silently vowed that he would protect Keizo and Kuyuki no matter what. To share the news, he went to his father's grave, proudly telling him he would soon be married. But on his return home, a dreadful sight awaited him as he saw villagers gathered at the front of the dojo, and a terrible sense of foreboding gripped him. What he feared most had come true. Someone from the Kenjutsu dojo had poisoned the well that supplied their water, driven by the bitterness of never being able to defeat Keizo or Hakuji in combat, all to claim the land. Inside the dojo, Hakuji found the bloodied, lifeless bodies of Keizo and Kuyuki sprawled across the floor. He dropped to his knees, hollow with grief. Again, he had failed. Again, he was too late to protect those who had given him everything. The words he once told Kuyuki rang in his ears, of how they would one day watch fireworks together. He recalled that night clearly, the soft burst of color in the sky, her quiet voice asking if he remembered their conversation about watching the fireworks. He hadn't, but she did. She told him that even when she had no hope of surviving another year, his promise gave her something to believe in. Blushing, she had held his hand and asked if he would be her husband, and in that warm glow of the sky, Hakuji had promised to protect her. Now, that promise lay broken. After the events that stripped Hakuji of his loved ones again, madness overtook him. Consumed by rage, he launched a blind, furious assault on the Kenjutsu dojo, slaughtering 67 men with his bare hands. The dojo walls were painted in blood. Brains, organs, and limbs splattered across the floor and ceilings in grotesque patterns. The lone maid who witnessed the massacre lost her mind from the sight alone. The carnage was so unthinkable, the records were dismissed as myth for 30 years, before being erased entirely. Dripping in blood and dazed by grief, Hakuji wandered aimlessly until he crossed a footbridge. There, waiting, was a man in black, Muzan. Drawn by rumors of a massacre that seemed beyond human means, Muzan had come expecting a demon. Instead, he found a man, and he was disappointed. Hakuji, in his broken state, threatened to kill him. But before he could move, Muzan pierced his skull with a hand. He then revealed his plan, to form an elite group of 12 demons, and asked if Hakuji could endure the blood needed to join. But Hakuji no longer cared. With nothing left to protect and no will to live, he accepted. And so, Akaza was born. He lost his memories, his name, his purpose. But deep within, the yearning to become stronger remained. Not for anyone, not to protect, but because pain was all he had. For over a century, Akaza committed acts of senseless brutality, and in the end, even he saw it clearly. His life was nothing but a sad, pathetic joke, a meaningless spiral of violence. He lamented that he couldn't reach heaven like his father, Keizo or Koyuki, and he cursed Tanjiro and Giyu for dragging him back into those memories. Just then, Tanjiro awoke. Eyes wide, he realized he had fainted mid-battle. Akaza's head was nearly fully regenerated by then. With no time to lose, he charged forward, determined to finish it. But as he swung, his sword slipped from his hand. Left with no other option, Tanjiro clenched his fist and struck Akaza across the face with a punch. As Tanjiro's punch connected with Akaza's face, a flash of recognition stirred within the upper moon. For a split second, it was not Tanjiro he saw, but Keizo. In that moment, Akaza finally understood why he had always despised the weak. It wasn't strength he loathed, it was helplessness. The helplessness he once felt as a boy, unable to save his father. The helplessness that returned when he found Keizo and Koyuki dead. And the helplessness that consumed him every day since becoming a demon. He had taken Keizo's martial art, his master's legacy, and twisted it into a weapon of slaughter. He had trampled on his father's final wish to live a righteous life. Now, with clarity piercing through the haze of centuries, Akaza understood who he truly needed to defeat. Meanwhile, Tanjiro stood in front of the crumbling demon, eyes wide as he sensed something horrifying. Akaza's stance shifted. He was about to unleash the very same technique that had claimed Rengoku's life. Tanjiro's gaze darted to Giyu, who lay weakened and directly in the path of the attack. Without a second thought, Tanjiro surged forward, wrapping his arms around the water Hashira's waist and hurling them both out of range. As they tumbled to the floor, Tanjiro glanced upward, and what he saw stunned him. Akaza, instead of chasing them, smiled faintly. It wasn't twisted or mocking, it was peaceful. And then, the attack detonated. A wave of destruction engulfed the chamber, tearing apart stone, wood, and flesh. When the dust settled, Akaza's body lay torn and crumpled, a brutal wreck of what it once was. Tanjiro stared at him in disbelief, his heart pounding. He had smelled something strange, something no demon had ever given off at death. Gratitude. In his final moments, Akaza's spirit stood quietly before his father's, burdened with years of regret. He asked if he was all right, to which his father gently replied, calling him by his human name, that he was. Overwhelmed, Akaza bowed low, crouching in sorrow as he apologized for not being able to fix himself. A warm hand came to rest on his head. It was Keizo's spirit, softly reassuring him that they would never abandon him, no matter what. Despite him being unable to reach the same heaven they now stood in. As Akaza cried out for his master, another presence loomed over him. Muzan's shadow slithered into his consciousness, grasping at the last shred of his mind, reminding him of the vow to get stronger, to keep fighting, and to never stop until all were destroyed. The familiar, suffocating control returned, and Akaza's body on the battlefield began to regenerate once more. His mouth forming a new vow to uphold his promise stopped him. A gentle and familiar hand touched his face. It was Koyuki. With a soft smile, she thanked him, calling him Hakuji, and told him he had done enough. For a moment, everything stood still. Akaza did not listen. He turned toward her and reached out. Not as the Upper Moon 3, he begged forgiveness, for not protecting her, for breaking his weight of closure in his chest. The battle was finally over. But the cost of it all came crashing down on both demon slayers. Their bodies, battered and drained beyond endurance, gave out beneath them, with the faintest breath of exhaustion. Moments later, news of Upper Moon 3's defeat quickly spread through the endless halls of the Infinity Castle, carried by the messenger crows. One felt it too, as a presence he had known for centuries quietly disappeared. That's it for the first part of the Infinity Castle arc. If you enjoyed the breakdown and want the next part right away, make sure to like and share. It really helps get this video to more fans like you. And if you're hungry for more Demon Slayer content, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're first to catch the next upload. Until then, stay tuned. I'll see you soon.